Okay, I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. It's a Tuesday morning.
Hmm.
You're the project manager on some massive infrastructure job, a hydroelectric dam, a new highway, and you are already stressed.
Of course.
The rainy season started 2 weeks early. Your site's a total mud bath. You're just bleeding money on idle equipment. You're behind schedule, and the client is breathing down your neck. So you scramble. You work weekends. You get the pumps going, and you finally get the project back on track.
It sounds like a pretty standard Tuesday in construction, to be honest.
Right. It's chaos, but it's managed chaos. But then a month later, the dust settles, and you sit down to calculate the bill. You figure, okay, that unpredicted storm cost us $1 million.
$1 million in downtime, extra pumping, overtime, all of it.
You submit your request for payment, totally confident. And the answer you get back from the employer isn't a negotiation. It isn't, let's see the receipts. It is a flat, cold, legal no.
$0.
Zero.
And why? Not because you didn't do the work, not because it wasn't a real storm, but because you sent an email on day 29 instead of day 28.
That is the nightmare. You did the work, you spent the cash, you get nothing. And that is exactly what we are digging into today.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are opening up the Red Book, the SEI Conditions of Contract for Construction, the 2017 edition, and we are going straight to the most dangerous pages in the entire book.
Clause 20. Employers and contractors' claims.
It sounds so dry, doesn't it?
It sounds incredibly dry when you just say the title. It sounds like administrative housekeeping, it's something you leave to the interns.
Right.
But in the world of international construction, Clause 20 is the battlefield. It is the guillotine clause.
The guillotine clause. Wow, that is a heavy nickname.
It's earned it. This clause is where projects either survive or they go bankrupt. If you don't understand the ticking clock mechanisms we're about to discuss, you can be morally right, you can be factually right, and you can still lose everything.
So, our mission today is to decode this mechanism. We're going to look at how you assert a right to money or time, the consequences of missing these deadlines, and this is the part that surprised me, how these rules apply to everyone.
That's a key observation.
It isn't just about the contractor begging for cash.
No. And if we zoom out for a second, the 2017 Red Book represents a massive shift towards what we call strict contract administration.
Yeah.
The old days of let's build it now and argue about the bill at the Christmas party.
Yeah, the handshake deal days.
Those are gone. Clause 20 is all about speak now or forever hold your peace.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've got the text of Clause 20 right here. It starts with Clause 20.1, simply titled Claims. It seems to divide the entire world of disputes into three specific buckets.
Right. Think of this as your triage map. Before you panic about deadlines, you need to know which bucket you're standing in. So Clause 20.1 breaks it down into three categories. Let's call them Bucket A, Bucket B, and Bucket C.
Okay, walk me through Bucket A. This was the one that caught me off guard because I always think of claims going one way.
Bucket A is fascinating because it flips the traditional script. This is where the employer considers they are entitled to something.
The employer.
Yes, maybe additional payment from the contractor or a reduction in the contract price, or even an extension of the defects notification period, the DNP.
Hold on. Usually when we talk about claims, the mental image is the contractor asking for more money because steel prices went up.
Sure.
But Bucket A is the employer wanting money back.
It happens more than you think. Maybe the employer provided water and electricity and wants to charge the contractor for it. Maybe the contractor damaged some existing road. Historically, employers would often just, unilaterally deduct that money from the next payment.
Yeah, I have the checkbook, so I make the rules approach.
Exactly. I'm holding your money, so I'm keeping some of it.
Huh.
But Clause 20 in the 2017 edition puts a stop to that. It says if the employer wants to claim money, they have to follow the procedure.
So they have to play by the same rules.
The same rules, the same notices, the same rigor as the contractor.
That feels like a significant leveling of the playing field.
In theory, yes. It imposes a reciprocity that wasn't always there. It effectively says, if you want to play the claims game, you have to follow the claims rules no matter who you are.
Okay, so that's Bucket A, employer claims. Bucket B must be the standard stuff.
Bucket B is the classic. The contractor feels they're entitled to more payment or an extension of time in EOT.
Yeah.
This is your we hit unexpected rock or the drawings were late scenario. This is the bulk of what we see.
And then we have Bucket C, the catch-all.
Bucket C is for when either party feels entitled to some relief that isn't specifically money or time. It's usually about disagreements over certificates or instructions. It has a slightly different past, but for today, we really need to focus on A and B.
Because A and B money and time, that's where the high stakes are. And the text says both of those buckets funnel you directly into Clause 20.2.
Correct. If you want money or time, you are locked into Clause 20.2. And this is where the guillotine lives.
Let's talk about the trigger. Clause 20.2.1, Notice of Claim. This is the start button on the stopwatch.
This is arguably the most critical paragraph in the whole contract. It says the claiming party, and remember, that could be the contractor or the employer, must give a notice to the engineer.
Okay.
And here's the trigger. You must do it as soon as practicable, and no later than 28 days after you became aware, or, and this is the important part, should have become aware of the event.
I want to stop you on that phrase, should have become aware. That sounds incredibly subjective. Who decides what I should have known?
It is subjective, and that's where the fights happen. But the intent is to stop willful ignorance. You can't just ignore a problem, leave an email unread, and then say, oh, I didn't realize until today.
So if a reasonable project manager would have spotted the issue, the clock started ticking whether you personally saw it or not.
Precisely. It assumes a level of professional competence. If the ground collapsed on the 1st of the month, a competent contractor knows about it on the 1st. You can't claim you discovered it on the 20th.
Okay, so we have 28 days. 4 weeks. In the grand scheme of a multi-year project, that doesn't sound like a lot of time. What happens if I'm busy? I'm trying to fix the actual problem, I'm managing a crisis, and I submit my notice on day 29.
This is where FIDI is just brutal. It's explicit. If you miss that 28-day window, 3 things happen instantly.
Okay.
1, you get no additional payment.
Yeah.
2, you get no extension of time.
And 3.
3 is the killer. The other party is discharged from any liability in connection with that event.
Discharge from liability. So legally, it's like it never happened, even if it was their fault.
Even if it was 100% their fault, even if they admit they caused the delay, if you didn't file the notice in 28 days, their liability is wiped clean. It's a complete bar to the claim.
It's a get-out-of-jail-free card.
That's exactly what it is. For the other side.
I have to play devil's advocate here. That feels incredibly harsh. We're building infrastructure, not playing some board game. Why is the contract so aggressive? Is it just a trap?
It feels like a trap, but there is a logic to it. FIDK defends this based on certainty. If you're the employer, you need to know now if the budget is going up. You need to know now if the completion date is sliding.
Right, because you have financing, you have stakeholders.
Exactly. You can't have a contractor show up 2 years later and say, by the way, remember that rainstorm in 2024? You owe me $1 million.
Because at that point, you can't investigate it. You can't mitigate it.
No. You can't tell the contractor, hey, don't use that expensive pump. Let's wait a day. It forces issues to the surface immediately so they can be managed. It prevents ambush claims.
So it forces communication. Aggressive communication, but communication.
Correct. It forces you to put your cards on the table.
Okay, so let's say I'm on the ball. I see a problem. I check the calendar. I fire off my notice of claim within the 28 days. I'm safe, right?
You are safe from the first guillotine. But now the ball is in the engineer's court. This brings us to Clause 20.2.2, the engineer's initial response.
So the engineer gets my notice. What are they supposed to do?
They have 14 days to check the timeline. They look at your notice and they look at the calendar. If they think, wait a minute, this event happened 2 months ago, you're late, they have to give a notice with reasons within those 14 days saying it's time barred.
And if they don't, what if the engineer's just silent? They miss the email.
Here is where the 2017 Red Book introduces a really interesting twist. In previous editions, silence was just annoying. In 2017, silence has a legal consequence.
Oh.
Clause 20.2.2 says if the engineer does not give a notice objecting within 14 days, the notice of claim is deemed to be a valid notice.
Deemed valid. That sounds powerful. So
Yeah.
silence equals acceptance.
It equals acceptance of the procedural validity. It doesn't mean they agree you deserve $1 million, but it means they can't later say, hey, you missed the 28-day deadline. They missed their chance to object.
That is a fascinating dynamic. It puts the pressure back on the engineer. They can't just sit on things.
It's a mechanism to keep the information flowing. Everyone has to move fast. It prevents the engineer from keeping a pocket veto to use later. It turns it into a game of tennis. You serve, they have to return.
And if they don't return, you win the point.
You win the point.
Okay, so notice is submitted. It's valid. Now I need to actually prove I deserve the money. This brings us to a phrase I see all the time, and honestly, it usually makes people roll their eyes. Contemporary records.
Ah, yes. the bane of every site manager's existence. Clause 20.2.3.
The text defines contemporary records as records prepared or generated at the same time or immediately after the event. Why is that so vital? Why can't I just write a report next week?
Because humans are terrible eyewitnesses. If you try to write a report today about what happened on a site 3 months ago, you will get it wrong. You'll misremember the weather, the number of trucks, the hours worked.
So contemporary means literally while it's happening. Daily logs, photos with timestamps.
Correct. The courts view contemporary records as having a much higher evidentiary value. And the clause puts a strict obligation on the claiming party to keep these records.
It even says the engineer has the right to inspect them.
Yes, during working hours. The engineer could walk into your office and say, show me the logs for the flooding claim. If you say, oh, he's going to write those up this weekend, you're in trouble.
It's basically PICS or it didn't happen, but for international law.
That is the best summary I've heard. I've seen solid legal claims fail where the contractor was absolutely in the right simply because they tried to reconstruct the evidence after the fact.
So we've got our notice, that's 28 days. We've got our records, which are daily. Now comes the heavy lifting, the fully detailed claim, clause 20.2.4.
This is the second hurdle. The notice was just a flag saying something is wrong. The fully detailed claim is the full dossier. It's the case file.
And what's the timeline on this one?
You have 84 days. But be careful, it's not 84 days from your notice.
Oh.
It's 84 days from when you became aware of the event.
Oh, wow. So that first 28 days is included in the 84.
Exactly. So after you send your notice, you have about 8 weeks to compile everything.
And everything is a lot. It lists 4 things: a detailed description, all the contemporary records, the math. And this is the one I feel like people might gloss over: a statement of the contractual or legal basis of the claim.
People gloss over it at their peril. That is the legal basis requirement.
Why is that so crucial? Why can't I just say, you owe me money because of the storm?
Because you have to tell them why they owe you money under the contract. You can't just say it cost me more. You have to say, under subclause 4.ei, unforeseeable physical conditions, I am entitled to this. You have to pin it to a clause.
You have to do the lawyer's work for them.
Essentially, yes, you are building the legal argument.
And what happens if I submit my nice big binder within 84 days? I have all the receipts, but I forget to include that paragraph citing the specific contract clause.
The guillotine falls again. Clause 20.2.4 is very specific. It says, if you fail to submit the statement of the contractual basis within 84 days, the notice of claim shall be deemed to have lapsed.
Lapsed. So it becomes invalid.
It becomes invalid. It's as if you never sent it. You are back to square one, but now you are definitely time-barred because the 28 days are long gone.
That is just incredible. You do everything right, miss one legal citation, and you lose.
It is strict. It's designed to force you to think through your claim. But again, look at the reciprocity. The engineer has the same 14-day rule here.
Let me guess. If I submit my claim without the legal basis, the engineer has 14 days to tell me, hey, this is lapsed.
You're catching on. If the engineer stays silent, the notice is deemed valid. It's that constant game of tennis again. Serve, return. If you don't return the serve, you lose the point.
This feels like a high-stakes poker game where the rules are as important as the cards. But let me ask you this. What if I do miss the 28-day notice? Is there any lifeline? Or am I just dead in the water?
That brings us to clause 20.2.5. And this is a very debated part of the 2017 edition. There is a lifeline, but it's thin.
Talk to me about it.
The engineer can still treat a late notice as valid if the circumstances justify it. The clause gives the engineer the power to take into account why the submission was late.
What kind of circumstances?
The clause mentions 2 big factors. First, prejudice. Would the other party be prejudiced by accepting the late submission?
Define prejudice here.
It means, does it actually hurt their ability to defend themselves? If you're a week late, but the evidence is still fresh and the hole in the ground is still there, maybe they aren't prejudiced.
Okay. And the second factor?
Prior knowledge. Did the other party already know about the event?
This seems like common sense. If the employer was standing right there when the wall collapsed, they can hardly claim they were surprised.
Exactly. It's there to prevent the time bar from being used abusively. But, and this is a huge but, you should never, ever plan on using this clause.
It's a Hail Mary.
It is entirely at the engineer's discretion. The engineer could easily say, yes, I knew about the wall, but I didn't know you intended to claim money for it. And then you're out.
So don't plan on using clause 20.2.5. Plan on hitting the 28 ways.
Absolutely. Treat it as emergency surgery, not a health plan.
Now there's one more scenario. We've talked about events, a storm, a collapsed wall. But sometimes a problem isn't a one-off. Imagine a strike that lasts for 3 months. How does a contract handle that?
That is Clause 20.2.6, claims of continuing effect. This is the Groundhog Day clause.
How does it work?
So you send your initial notice. Then, for your 84-day submission, you submit what's called an interim claim. You say, this is what it has cost us so far.
But you aren't done.
You have to submit further interim claims at monthly intervals, every single month. You have to update the accumulated amount. You have to keep feeding the paperwork beast.
We can't just wait until it's all over.
No. If you stop submitting the monthly updates, you risk your payout. Then, once the event finally ends, you have 28 days to submit the final fully detailed claim.
It sounds like an administrative burden that requires a dedicated team just to manage the paper.
On large projects, that is exactly what happens. You have entire teams of claims consultants whose only job is to track these Clause 20 deadlines.
So what does this all mean for someone listening?
The lesson from Clause 20 is that in modern contracts, procedure is as important as substance. You can be right on the facts, but if you lose on procedure, you lose the money. It's not fair, maybe, but it is the rule.
Let's recap the survival kit for Clause 20. If you take nothing else away, remember these 4 points. Number 1, the notice. You have 28 days from when you should have known. Miss it, you get 0.
Number 2, records. If it's not written down when it happened, it doesn't count. Contemporary records are your currency.
Number 3, the detail. You have 84 days to submit the full package, and do not forget the legal basis statement. Pin it to a clause or you lose.
And number 4, silence. Watch the engineer. If they don't object to your procedural notices within 14 days, their silence deems your notice valid. Use that.
It's a high-pressure environment, and I think what stands out to me most is that shift we talked about at the beginning. The employer is bound by this too.
That's the theory. The contract says if the employer wants to deduct money, they must file a Clause 20 claim, just like the contractor.
But here's the provocative thought I want to leave you with. The contract says the playing field is level. Clause 20 applies to both sides. But in the real world, the employer holds the checkbook. They have the money.
That is the reality. The employer can just withhold payment, and the contractor has to sue to get it back. The contractor has to spend money to get money.
So, does this clause actually level the playing field? Or does creating such a rigorous bureaucratic hurdle actually favor the party with the biggest legal team and the deepest pockets? Because if you are a smaller contractor, keeping up with these deadlines might just bleed you dry before you ever see a dime.
It raises a massive question about access to justice in construction. Is the contract a tool for clarity or a weapon for those who could afford the administration?
Something to think about the next time you sign a contract. That's it for this deep dive into the FIDIC Red Book. We'll see you next time.
Keep your records contemporary.
If you're interested in the templates, please visit our shop. The link is in the description.
Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and see next time.